My initials are LSD, and we're going on a trip together somewhere. Who was the man in the red vest? Lee Sherman Dreyfus, our LSD, was president and later chancellor of the Stevens Point campus from 1967 to 1977, and led the student body on a trip that altered the very fabric of the university. He is described as having a very powerful personality, and reactions from the faculty and students of the era vary greatly.
Lee Sherman Dreyfus was an interesting character. He was full of himself. He was blowhard. He was a self-promoter. It was a person that I never really, liked personally very much. He was, I think, very good at promoting the university. He promoted both his own career, but in the process, he promoted the university, and he had some good qualities, I think.
So my first impression of him was that very forceful personality, but not going anywhere. He came across very strong and likable, but didn't seem to have where he was going. He was very good at speaking. He could have an audience in the palm of his hand, but when you got done and left the room he was speaking in, you scratch your head and wanted to know what it was he said. Okay. He was very good at what he did, but it didn't have a message.
He was a main upfront position, so he represented the university mainly externally, very heavily, and he was very much involved with students, and so he was known as the students' chancellor, which is also why the University Center is named after him.
During the 1950s and 60s, the campus underwent a boom of post-war enrollment and had to construct additional buildings to accommodate the increased number of students. Then along came LSD. Dreyfus guided the campus through this period of profound change, which led to increased student involvement on campus. He also oversaw the merger of Wisconsin State University into the current UW system. Under Dreyfus, the campus also consolidated departments, constructed new buildings, founded the Schmeeckley Reserve, instituted co-ed dorms, and established the ROTC. However, this story is not just about a man. Dreyfus serves as a symbol, a lens through which to evaluate the changing character of not only the university, but also of student involvement during a great moment of uncertainty. Nothing captured this period better than the 1971 issue of the student yearbook, The Iris. It features a trifold with sections on the Vietnam War, environmentalism, and Playboy, and presents a three-pronged approach that highlighted major student concerns. Students tackled several controversial issues in this period. However, Vietnam inspired the most activism, and during the Dreyfus years, it was seared into the students' consciousness. The institution of the ROTC, our Reserve Officers Training Corps, during this era inspired widespread activism on campus. Such activism was due to the intense controversy surrounding the war in Vietnam.
The culture on campus was really a different time period than we see today for many reasons. But the ROTC and me as what became an anti-war activist or participated in other peace activities, let's say, became a focal point not so much because of the potential student recruits, but just because it was somewhat envisioned as a military recruitment or outpost on an academic environment. We actually occupied Nelson Hall for two reasons. The armory for ROTC was in the basement of the Nelson Hall at that time. It was a very small armory. We had no intention of getting into the armory, but we wanted to sit down in the hallway, civil disobedience, to prevent those guns from being used, even for training, let's say. But the reason why we ended up in Nelson Hall was, okay, the ROTC had an office in the basement or an armory, but also they had started bombing Cambodia. So the war was all of a sudden extended, beyond. So it became focal points, and ROTC was just one facet of that.
They occupied, I think, Dreyfus's office. Dreyfus, I think, handled it pretty well. Well, some of the things he did in that era I wasn't in favor of, but he was not confrontational. He allowed students to stay in Nelson Hall through the weekend. He didn't call in the police. So I thought it was, given what could have been, very hairy situation, I think he handled it fairly well.
While concern over the Vietnam War was certainly profound, it was not the only issue on students' minds. They were concerned for the environment as well. One of the biggest examples of environmentalism on campus surrounded the founding of Schmeeckley Reserve. The Schmeeckley Reserve was founded on land originally acquired by the university for further expansion. The North Campus Planning and Utilization Committee was formed to determine the future of this parcel. The committee's ultimate decision was that the land should be set aside as refuge for wildlife, for research and education, and to serve the recreational needs of the campus and the community. In the end, this decision formed the guiding mission of the reserve. Controversy ensued when Century Insurance expressed interest in building their facilities on the wetlands.
The building was actually built in a wetland area. And so consequently, they needed fill for that area. And that fill then became a lake. And they called it, it was never named it, but it was called Dreyfus Lake because Dreyfus was the chancellor at the time. And that was actually not the true name of it. And it was later actually given a name. I don't know if anybody calls it that, but it was actually dedicated to Jonas, who was the president of Century and chairman of the board of Century, John Jonas. And so the lake is actually called Jonas Lake. That lake, which is out there, is not a natural lake. And so that was done for fill for the building, which created some environmental issues. It also created issues that students swam in that lake. Well, there was problems of students swimming in that lake. It's a lake, it looks like you should swim in it. But the fact is, because it's not a natural lake, it doesn't have natural feeding to that lake. So there's a high bacterial content there. So that's a problem that exists to today. So it's an area that was artificially created. So those are environmental issues that were raised at that time.
In addition to activism surrounding the Vietnam War and environmentalism, the feminist movement was a catalyst for confronting gender inequality on campus. And what better way to confront gender inequality than to include a Playboy centerfold in the yearbook? On the surface, this may seem shocking, or even downright offensive, but the creators of this racy edition were mocking gender stereotypes. While it may have made light of a serious topic, it pointed to larger concerns regarding student sexuality. Not only were students sexually active, but they had multiple partners by the time they reached their senior year. According to results from a poll taken in 1971, a typical WSU student believed in premarital sex, was not a virgin, and was not attached to any one individual. Students called for increased gender equality and for the abolition of rules that discriminated against women. The end result was co-ed dorms and the lifting of regulations that prohibited students from conducting their overnight activities safely. In the spirit of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, students were also involved in activism relating to the legalization of marijuana, as well as the ability to consume alcohol. And what better form of activism could there be to usher in the reign of LSD? According to a 1971 student survey, 65% of students approved legalization of marijuana, with 53% having tried it. The students never protested louder nor fought more aggressively than they did for their right to drink. Months before Dreyfus took office, Wisconsin's governor supported legislation that would increase the drinking age from 18 to 21. The result? Beer riots.
Governor Knowles came to pitch he was going to raise the beer drinking age to 21, along with hard liquor. He came out on the second floor of the Whiting Hotel. He got egged. It was about 10 in the morning. And then I was studying over here, but I saw all of these kids going by down the street and then onto Main Street and going west. So I got done with what I was doing and decided to go see what was going on, because there were dozens and dozens and dozens of kids going down. And what had happened apparently is that when the kids got done downtown, Stevens Point had only one stop and go light on the corner of Main and Division. Those are two main highways now, 51 and 10. If you were going to go east, west, north, south, you had to go through that intersection. So the kids started a bonfire right in the middle of that intersection, and nobody could go anywhere. It was interesting. And the police around here, who had never had any riot training, didn't know how to handle it. The fire trucks weren't allowed to get in. The students just massed in the streets and wouldn't allow them in. So there it sat for quite some time. Finally, at some point in the afternoon, the sheriff's department and the police managed to drive the students out of the intersection, so then they went down on the end of Clark Street. And there was a business there called Northwest Liquor, had a Point beer truck sitting in the parking lot. They pushed the Point beer truck into the middle of the street, blocking the bridge, and trashed the truck.
And by that time, it became the closest thing that Stevens Point would ever have as a riot, at least to my recollection, and yet we were not prepared for such. The next morning, they had actually authorities of sheriffs, deputies, police on every corner with a riot helmet on and a billy club, just standing there making sure this was never going to happen again. And they actually got quite a bit of publicity, and if you look in like newspaper archives, and we have a library there, you can find things, Stevens Point beer riot and things like that.
In this situation, the Stevens Point campus can be both compared and contrasted with the university in Madison. Protests on the Madison campus often turned violent, and the university's physics building was bombed in 1970, killing one person and injuring 3 more. While the beer riots on the Stevens Point campus certainly turned militant, subsequent protests proved to be peaceful, largely due to the charisma and skills possessed by Lee Sherman Dreyfus. A student editorial from the Counterpoint newspaper summed up this contrast and stated that, while neighboring Madison is a hotbed for social change, Stevens Point is dedicated to social, academic, and political conformity and stagnation. To characterize the lack of violence in Stevens Point as stagnation is perhaps unfair. The peaceful protests on the Point campus were largely due to student and faculty cooperation and the restrained reaction by campus administration. And at the center of it all, Dreyfus led the way. His open-door policy allowed for effective communication with students and allowed him to adequately address their concerns. Dreyfus left the chancellorship in 1977 and became governor of Wisconsin in 1978. But while he was president and chancellor, LSD took the campus on a trip that the university would remember for decades to come. And that is why his iconic quote still resonates today. Not only is it a clever play on words, it is a statement that rings true to his ability to work with students to create a better future. While he may not have been universally loved, he left a lasting legacy at UWSP. Whether this is due to his iconic red vest, passionate speeches, or rapport with students, the spirit of LSD lives on.